Who are you guys with? What are you doing here?
I run an emerging leaders program in Australia, bringing young professionals to COP to give them an experience and close the experience gap between world leaders and soon-to-be world leaders, because we think that young people really need a space to be given opportunity, ignite the light bulb, even if they're not working in the climate sector right now, if they have potential to. When you can ignite a conversation and connect on a human level and empower one another, you don't know what's possible. So that's why we're here.
Fantastic. And how long have you known about the crisis in the climate? How long have you been concerned about it?
Pretty much my whole life. So, my dad, he's worked in the environment space his whole life. So I've been pretty fortunate that it was, something that was discussed at dinner tables throughout my childhood and sort of high schooling years. And been, trying to do something from about the age of 15. So, 7 years now. So it's, pretty crazy to think that, we're at COP27. I'm 22 years old. So this whole process is, more, older than me. So it's quite surreal just being here and hopefully, there's not a COP, 50. So we'll see.
I think there will be if the planet survives that long. Speaking of, how long do you guys think we have before it just becomes irreversible? There's no more time to act. Any idea how much longer we might have?
I think the question asking how much time we have is the wrong question to ask, because it was yesterday or last week or 10 years ago, 27 years ago, is how much time we had. What we're doing now is mitigating. We're not avoiding the consequences of climate change, we're mitigating them. And I think that's a really important question, really important saying we need to be explaining is that we're not working to find the solutions to solve climate change, we're working to find the solutions to mitigate the consequences, because we've f***ed up.
So you don't think we need to find solutions to the climate crisis?
Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
But it's not a solution to solving the problem.
Okay.
It's a solution to mitigating the problem.
What should we do to mitigate the problem?
I'm not a climate expert.
Oh, okay.
I'm an advocate.
Okay.
And I think you don't need to be an expert in everything, but if you have a passion for something and understand, in an Australian context, I know that we are the windiest and sunniest country in the world. We are a wealthy country and have an incredible capability to take on the technological advancement and transition entirely to a green powerhouse. I know that. I don't study climate science. I'm not a scientist. I'm just a concerned young person. And I think here at COP, something that's been really present to us is questions like this, where in the halls, in the plenaries, we're talking about these really intellectual things, where at the end of the day, we're just going to take it back to human connection. We're talking about people. We're talking about empathy. And it's really sad that in spaces like this, we need to talk about why that's important, because that is the basis of being a good human.
Do you guys think the education systems of the world are doing enough to fight the climate? I don't know what it looks like in Australia, but in America, a lot of schools don't teach anything about climate. In fact, some states are run by climate deniers. Do you guys think the education sector is doing enough to deal with this crisis?
No. And I think, I don't know how to put this. I don't think it's teaching, young people, if you're talking about young people and educating young people, we've lived every day, single day of our lives in a climate crisis. We know what the impacts are. We know what it's like we don't know what it's like to not live in the climate crisis. Educating young people is, yes, teaching them about the science, teaching them the basics of climate change. It's also teaching them how to do something about it. The education system doesn't do anything for that. It's equipping young people with the skills, the networks, the empowerment to ignite that in their mind to say, I actually can contribute positively, whether it be at a local level, a national level, or an international level. That's what the power of our generation has.
Do you think the UN should have some role in helping to move this process along?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think every jurisdiction has a role in including young people, even being into elected office. I was recently elected as deputy mayor of my region.
Wow.
That's a really big step
Cool.
in terms of democracy, but we should be doing more to encourage young people. Not, you don't get the book of life when you turn a certain age. You get the experience by living a life, and when you can turn that lived experience into a cog that fits into the machine, that's what gets it moving. You don't need to go get a degree and study for 10 years to do these things. If that's your chosen avenue, absolutely. But there are so many other avenues that we don't empower young people and emerging leaders to sort of engage in. And that's why we run our program, is that we want young professionals to realise that the solutions to climate change can be as simple as having a conversation at the dinner table, or as simple as saying no to a plastic straw, or as simple as having a conversation like this with media, or talking in a school, or working in a company and shifting the narrative around what it means to be a corporate and corporate responsibility. Social responsibility, all these things move into one stage. We don't need to be all doing the same thing, but we all need to be on the same page.
Okay. And last question, I know you guys got places to go, but in America, we have a lot of people who deny that climate change is even an issue, a man-made thing. In fact, Donald Trump just announced he's running for president again. He's famously said many times, climate change is a hoax. It's invented by the Chinese to deindustrialize our countries. What convinced you guys that the science was legitimate, and what do you have to say to Americans who believe those things?
I'm really brutal when I get asked this question. It's if you're on the wrong side or right side of history, and that's a choice you have to make, because science is not something you can believe in and choose to believe in. It's actual factual things of how the world
What was
works.
it specifically that convinced you that the IPCC reports, for example, were correct and legitimate?
It's just the basics of science. You know, you grow up and you trust science and all these things. I'm not a science expert. I'm not a climate expert, but I'm not an expert in anything else. But I still trust the science with all these things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we even have a lot of scientists in America. I don't know if you guys hear about them, but we've got a lot of very prestigious scientists. They work at fancy institutions. Some of them have actually worked on the IPCC, and they say this whole thing's a fraud. How do you know they're not telling the truth and others are?
You know, even if, which there isn't any inaccuracies, but you just look around, and I'd encourage, Trump to go and visit some of our Pacific Island countries and see those homes going underwater where they've lived there for 60,000 years. And, just in the last 200 years, because of literally every trend and every flag that's pointing that way, we're now seeing such huge issues that are now visible. And it's not just a developing nation problem. You guys have had huge wildfires. We've had huge wildfires in Australia as well. We've had floods. We've still have bushfires. And it's something that, you can now see that these warning signs are now being seen all across the world. So even if you don't believe in the science, you can still see what is happening. And what is the alternative? Is the alternative, hey, we're not going to believe in this, and we're just going to let these natural disasters continue to occur and continue to become worse as they have throughout the last period? Or are you just going to, even just put the science aside and just actually try to, as Toby's been talking about, mitigate and try to, help these people get through this problem as a human-to-human connection and a moral obligation?
Yes, it's interesting. And I said last question, I'll ask you one more and then I'll be done. But it's interesting you guys mentioned sea level rise, because one of the guys I spent some time with, did a long interview with him, Dr. Niels Axel Morner. He was a lead sea level reviewer for the sea level section of the UN IPCC report. And when I talked to him, he said, they're lying to you. There is no sea level rise. He said he's been monitoring sea level in the Pacific for, I think, 50 or 60 years. He said there is objectively no sea level rise. In fact, he said if you talk about global sea level, you don't know what you're talking about, because it can go up in one place and down in another. And he said he warned the IPCC not to publish this. They published it anyway. And so he ordered his name removed and he resigned. But I mean, what do you do with stuff like that?
Go visit these areas. There are so many voices here of people that are literally pleading to be able to practice culture, not lose their language, live in traditional people, Indigenous people in Australia, the Torres Strait Islands, coastal regions in the Pacific. These are stories of people. Is it so hard to be a good person, actually empathize with somebody that is going through it, living through a time where their country is at risk? I've met people who literally have photos over time frames of the rising seas.
Yeah, he showed me some. There's a tree, he's been photographing it for 50 years. And actually, he met me on the coast of the Baltic Sea. He asked me to meet him at a specific place. So you see this line right here? The Swedish king in 17-something put that there to mark the sea level. And it was actually 3 meters above sea level when we went there, 2018 or 2019. And he said, see, the sea level is now 3 meters lower here than it was when the Swedish king put this line here. So I'm just trying to figure out how do we deal with that stuff. I mean, we've had wildfires and tornadoes and hurricanes for all of human history. And I just wonder, how do you convince people that climate change is real when you're dealing with stuff like that?
I mean, it's like with the age that we live in with, I mean, you guys talk about it all the time, fake news and Google and just the
So much
access,
fake news.
the access of information. You can sort of find anything you want. So yes, there is that story that, there is a scientist that resigned and, wanted to go against it. But you can find anything, and then you could also find the probably thousands of other scientists that, still backed their...
I wish that were true, but actually the head of communications for the UN announced in a podcast with the World Economic Forum just like a month ago that the UN now had a partnership with Google to bury what she called climate disinformation. So it's actually becoming harder and harder to find things like that.
There's other search platforms out there. So maybe that's Trump's next idea, is to try to compete with Google and build out his media empire. But I mean, as we've been saying, it doesn't matter, whether there's sea levels going up in some areas, sea levels decreasing in others. You can hear the voices, and you can hear every president, every prime minister of all of these island countries, not just in the Pacific, in the Caribbean, in all these low-lying nations, and they're calling out on behalf of their people for change and for people to listen. And I mean, as a human, and all the injustices that we've seen, like, I'm someone from a very conservative area of Australia, probably the most conservative.
A lot of climate deniers there.
Our old prime minister was.
I remember that.
He lives around the corner from me, so that is my area. Like, I don't come from a, waving the flag. Like, I really need to see practical information, and I don't. So I'm not. I don't know how I'm trying to articulate this, but essentially, if you look at everything that we've been seeing from these world leaders, and I mean, you sort of have to trust that they're doing the best on behalf of their people. And if you've spoken with any, young Pacific Island people here, or any people that are impacted, then I'm sure they could tell you stories that we as, privileged Australians who aren't experiencing what they are, they'd be able to, share and hopefully change, or, inspire, educate, and sort of share what they're going through.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thanks.
Take care, guys. Thank you.